Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, our fundamental belief is that change is where opportunity happens, and the best way to find opportunity in change is a network that's diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. One of the things that we like to do on a regular basis is bring subject matter experts in to help us think about how we should be approaching the different problems that we face in new ways. And today we've got Mackenzie Lee with us. Mackenzie was a former management consultant, has spent a lot of time helping a lot of businesses grow and change how they are actually implementing structure in their businesses. As CEO of Cedar, the way that I described it to Mackenzie was he thinks about the ingredients to the office of the CEO and the recipe to make them work. And so Mackenzie does all things related to chief of staff and really helping make everything happen that provides a lot of leverage for the organization at the very top. Mackenzie, great to see you. What would you like to add to the introduction that we've given for you?
Well, thanks, Matt, for having me. And, at Cedar, we like to think that we help leaders let go and do more. So, we're trying to help CEOs find freedom, however elusive that might be in the organization by building strong offices of the CEO.
Uh, Obviously, the office of the CEO, that's an investment in overhead for a business. There's cost that goes along with this. There's got to be good reasons to do it. When you're working with organizations, what are the trigger points that you see that they should be spending more time and effort in cracking the nut on how they should be getting more effective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of my personal goal is changing the narrative of the office of the CEO as a cost center and really thinking of it as a growth engine. So the way that I think about two things that the office of the CEO does, it helps save time so that you can grow faster. On the saving time side, the chief of staff EA can really give leverage to the CEO so that they can get out of meetings that they shouldn't be, really clearing the schedule for them to do deep thinking work. And then on the growth piece, the CEO oftentimes is making strategic relationships or even originating deals. I have relationships with the office of the CEO at Salesforce, and they talk about customer engagements, right? So how do they set up Mark Benioff for success and creating deal flow? They actually put him in meetings and put him in dinners, right? Where he's actually meeting with other CEOs and other leaders. So at the very core of it, the office of the CEO is helping folks in the C-suite and the CEO specifically save time so they can grow faster. And the more you can stop working on the business and in it, you can work on growth focused, future oriented types of projects.
So I love that you brought up Salesforce. It's a massive company, right? And so talking to the office of the CEO, you can see that they probably have to invest a lot of money because Mark Benioff, he is a growth engine for the company. As you were talking to them, what are some of the things that surprised you on what they do to be able to make Mark more effective?
Yeah, I mean, Mark, wherever he goes, he just has an army of folks that put maybe 20 people in his dinners, and then he's able to hire a really fun kind of creative musical talent, even. And he passes around, a microphone at these dinners and is able to, really create relationships really quickly with a lot of very senior folks. And honestly, when I talk to more offices of the CEO, even in the Fortune 1000, they don't really think about deploying the CEO in this manner. So I think there's a huge amount of low-hanging fruit. Just even having a chief of staff in your office of the CEO that can enable CEO-led sales, right? Or even founder-led sales is a concept with smaller companies. And really putting metrics around CEO-led sales, right? Like how many dinners are we doing and how many touch points are we doing? And like what's the follow-up? And it sounds basic, but it's really not happening as much. And I think particularly now in such a remote world, the in-person is so valued and maybe even rare, right? So getting those high stakes live events between the meeting of the minds of CEOs is very important, right? For the upside.
Right. Um, so when we're thinking about being able to take these folks and make them more effective, you said a lot of Fortune 1000 organizations aren't considering how they're deploying the CEO. What do you think is getting in their way on that? Why,
Well,
why doesn't this occur to them? to do.
I don't want to tick off the CEOs, but sometimes, CEOs just don't want a chief of staff, or they don't want an office of the CEO. They don't want an EA that's really senior even. I've talked to even a Fortune 10 company, they don't have a chief of staff. They only have one lone EA in the office of the CEO, which is wild to me. The amount of leverage that they could get with just an additional resource would be huge. And so part of it is maybe an old school view of, okay, I will just have a C-suite. I won't have a chief of staff. I will have no team in the office of the CEO. Part of it is maybe this conception, like you said, of the office as a cost center as opposed to a revenue generating, entity. And, not every CEO has been exposed, right, to those offices of the CEO elsewhere in organizations. They don't understand the best practice, like what's the art of the possible. And that's what we're trying to do at Cedar, right? We're trying to go and benchmark, research, talk to different offices of the CEO and surface some of these best practices in forums like these, right? So we can actually say, hey, this is what you're leaving on the table, right? This is the possible, art of the possible.
So when you're conceiving of the chief of staff and what they should be, what they should do, give us a little bit of the vision on like, who this person is and how they are helping the CEO.
Yeah, I mean, I decompose the role into different areas, maybe 5 to 7 different areas. When I say the chief of staff is a strategic advisor, it's a trusted, confidant. They are a master organizer, chief change agent, director of communications, and also do special projects. So they could do a number of things, but the reality is that whatever CEO and organization that I'm placing these chiefs of staff with, it depends, right? It depends on what's the unique flavor of that C-suite. And so my cheeky way of talking about assessments is that we don't do a 360, we do a 1080. 360 is not enough. We've got to look around 3 revolutions. So in doing a 1080-degree leadership assessment, we really understand not only the CEO, but the C-suite team, and also what the org needs to actually then create the role of the chief of staff. So we can put percentage allocations on some of the roles that I just mentioned, but then also start to think about the temperament or maybe a skill gap on the leadership team that the chief of staff can plug on an interim basis. So we really get in deep, and the more that we are able to do that, the better we are confident in going to the market and saying, this is the actual spec for the role, so that we're actually placing the right person. It's not enough to hire someone who worked at McKinsey and went to HBS and think it's going to work out by just placing this person, right? On credentials alone. You really have to think about all these other intangibles and also the hard skills that will make this leadership team super successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really close relationship that you're asking people to, like, if you're saying they should be a confidant, the requirement is that they should get tight quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I say it's actually the most intimate relationship in business, or maybe sometimes in the CEO's life, right? Because you're day in, day out, and the chief of staff will likely know what's going on the personal side of the CEO, obviously, in addition to the professional side. So making sure that the match is amazing, intimate, tight, the styles match as well. Very difficult. And of course, I'm biased because that's the work that we do, right? But really want to make sure that that pairing is one of the most enabling, exciting, and at times inspirational matches in business.
So when a CEO's starting to think, hey, something's not quite right here, I need to start implementing the office of the CEO. What are the things that are going through their head? What are the signals that the CEO is seeing on a micro level that indicates that
Yep.
they need to be giving themselves more time and space?
Yeah. I talk about these red alarm bells, right, that may be flashing that lead a CEO to think about, hiring a chief of staff or building the office of the CEO. I mean, it's like looking at your calendar at first up and just saying, hey, am I back to back? And is there a wall of meetings, or do I actually have space, right? And the meetings that I have on the calendar, are they actually internal focus that I'm just trying to chase things or get people, to do the things I want, or are they more growth oriented, which would be the goal. Taking a look at even your own personal relationship with work. So does work spill over into your evening, or does your spouse or partner say you're working too much in the business, right? Looking at the whole holistic time allocation. If you're spending too much time at work, and it's your personal relationships are suffering because of that. Other things that are alarm bells are, again, on the growth piece, like, hey, if you've taken money as a VC-backed startup, for example, and you have a mandate to grow, but you're not hitting your growth targets because you're just dealing with operational fires or client work, right? That's a signal also to think about how can you get yourself more leverage as a CEO.
So you alluded to, there's bunch of different types of companies that are out there. You got startup CEOs that may need something totally different than someone who's at a public company. When we're thinking about how the office of the CEO should work, thinking about, let's just use size as an example. Smaller company versus larger company, what are the factors that you look at in terms of how a office of the CEO should be working differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the typical milestones and goals from stage company that you would expect, right? The chiefs of staff's goal and the office of the CEO's goal is to maximize the impact of the CEO. And so whatever they're trying to achieve at that moment will dictate the size of the office or the complexity of the office. If you're a small startup, of course, maybe you just have a chief of staff and maybe like a part-time remote EA, right? Moving on to, Fortune 100 company, you'll have teams of upwards of a dozen people, right? Actually doing communications, events, special projects in the office of the CEO. So really, really depends. Obviously, in large employee count organizations, things are highly cross-functional and matrixed. And so more complexity is maybe seen, the office of the CEO, Salesforce, like I mentioned, or even Accenture. And then you also start to see multiple chiefs of staff also that are outside the office of the CEO, but actually connect with the office at multiple touch points. So, at Google, there's chiefs of staff at a certain level. I think I don't remember, like level 9 or level 10. I forget what like the leader level is, but you're authorized or you're able to gain a chief of staff if you reach that level of leadership. And so there's kind of this like central nervous system of chief of staff at larger companies. That also intersect with the office of the CEO.
At those larger companies with multiple chiefs of staff around, are they intentionally utilizing a network within? They're saying like, oh yeah, chief of staff, are they doing hangouts together? Are they using each other as sources of information? And how formal is that?
I looked into it and it's not that formal. A chief of staff just said, "Hey, let me just connect with my counterpart at another part of the business at Google," and sort of this homegrown type of network. And again, I'm highly biased, but I think there's so much to gain through a star performer program that actually places all these chiefs of staff in like one place, right, and allows them to exit into leadership roles after doing their tour of duty. And so this whole network of aspiring chiefs, current chiefs, and then exited chiefs can be a really amazingly powerful cohort. We talk about like the PayPal mafia of like CEOs that or founders that came together and made PayPal, right? Well, we can talk about chief of staff mafia even at Google as one organization, really high performing folks that are hungry, are determined to get mentorship from leadership, which they don't get in their daily maybe in the previous role, and then actually to exit to leadership after. And so these are highly accomplished, credentialed, hungry, oftentimes management consultants or bankers or, high performing folks that really want to make an impact and will go the extra mile in what I call a 1.5 FTE job. I mean, it's not like a 9 to 5. It's a real, impact that these chiefs are delivering.
The idea of being remote has become a lot more prominent since COVID, right? People are working all over the place, but more people are coming together now than they used to. How do you think about the chief of staff role as being different in the remote, in-person, and hybrid environments?
Yeah, I mean, my cheeky response is that I don't think there's any company that's truly in person. I mean, there's just people that are on the phone or people are on Zoom. Maybe they're a little bit more hybrid, but I think obviously there's elements of remote or, there's consultants or there's vendors or there's partners, right? A company or organization is kind of a nexus of multiple like people in this network, right? So I mention this because there's an explosion of vendors, there's an explosion of partners, right? There's an explosion of stakeholders. And so the office of the CEO and the chief of staff is really trying to promote and maintain and nurture these relationships between the CEO and all these people, right? In a distributed network. And so very important that the chief of staff is adept at managing relationships in a virtual setting, obviously in person as well. But key differences, in a fully remote team, obviously, making sure that there's some sort of semblance of company culture and like ways of working that are fully defined, bringing together people thoughtfully, in all hands and also in offsites and retreats, extremely important. In the in-office model, I think a lot of things that CEOs are dealing with is like, what does the return to office mandate look like? And what is the actual communication around that? So that's what the chiefs of staff are needing to manage now. It's like, how do we make sure that, half the workforce doesn't quit because we're doing the RTO? Or maybe that's their goal, by the way, to do selective attrition. But those are some of the things that the chiefs of staff are supporting their CEOs on. Like, what does that RTO look like? Actually getting the office space for people to come into office again, right? And then managing a new semblance of company culture, right? That's developed post-pandemic.
So as we're thinking about, there's a ton of different things that the chief of staff can be doing. And I think that you're asking in part for intellectual flexibility on these people. It's like, hey, what are the problems that you want to be thinking about? You're putting out a new playbook for the office of CEO coming up. What are some of the things that you wanted to focus on in the playbook that is adding value to the folks that you're working with?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's just the basics, honestly. Not everyone knows what the office of the CEO is and who was on the team. So it's really getting clear on the definition of the common roles titles. We see a chief of staff, we see an EA, we see a strategy manager, customer engagement director, executive communications. And then beyond that, after we have the basics, really thinking about elements of enablement and execution for the office around communications, around even talking about benchmarking or assessing your office as a CEO. People don't know what good looks like today. So, we've created a maturity model to say, hey, this is what you should care about in the office of the CEO, right? With 5 different areas. Other thing, like we just talked about at the jump of our call, top of our call, really thinking about sales, customer engagement, touch points. I mean, we are in a tight, difficult macroeconomic environment today. Growth is on every CEO's mind and should be on the minds of every employee too, obviously. So really looking at the ways that the office can really boost growth, can really enable, sales and marketing. Those are some of the topics that we hit in that playbook.
Okay, great. And the common roles and titles, I'm glad that you brought that up in terms of thinking about those things. When you are talking about, there are some organizations out there, they are allergic to the term chief of staff, right? But you got people that are essentially doing that job. I guess 2-part question on this. Do you think it's worthwhile to switch people over to thinking about the chief of staff in that job? Or if not, like, what are some of the other titles that we think that someone can effectively do that job in?
Yeah, I think I have a post out that says, there's 1,000 de facto chiefs of staff out there. They just don't know it, and their boss doesn't know it. But the reality is that the CEO is big borrowing and stealing resources because the job of the CEO is so complex and difficult, right? So they're looking for leverage. Well, while it may not be formalized and titled and with sponsorship, the fact of the matter is happening on the ground today. So other titles, someone who's like a VP of business strategy and operations. I was actually just talking to someone who was at the A-Rod Corporation under Alex Rodriguez, and they actually didn't use the term chief of staff because it didn't resonate well with the entertainment world and industry. But the fact of the matter on the ground was that this person in my talent network was playing that role, right? So VP of business strategy operations, executive communications is also, or someone on the marketing team is really helping, burnish the CEO's image in the market. From Giovanni, yes, absolutely. Executive operations is a new term. I think it also helps get away from this concept of executive assistant too, by the way, which is a very weak term, but really thinking about operations, operating, like getting at scale, like multiple reps, multiple activities that the CEO is doing. And then, sometimes the COO is playing this role too, right? The COO is looking at the health of the organization and maybe even assigning some of these special projects to someone on the team.
What do you think about when people are they have a business card that has a really long title where essentially they're dual hatted? Like I am VP of Executive Operations and Strategy and Chief of Staff. Does that help hinder? How do you think about that?
I think it's hard. I mean, it's just like, well, first of all, not only to yourself, like who are you? And then every touch point you have in the organization, right? Do I think about you in A or do I think about you in B? Right? Very difficult. Um, and that's why, upfront work to define the role and then to roll out a communications plan that teaches the org how to come to you and interact with you as a chief of staff, very important, right? Even chalking up the wins underneath your belt on a regular basis will teach the other C-suite and other leaders how to
Right.
come to you for a win, right? And then even for the chief of staff themselves, as they look for a promotion or more pay, putting a VP level next to it or even, director level helps them move up in seniority and has a cleaner title, right? Rather than and,
Right.
like an extended
Right.
title.
Yeah. Part of sometimes I've seen people add it because they're like, I'm worried about the credibility if I'm just a chief of staff. People are bringing their baggage to that. If I've got this other title, then they're bringing the
Right.
baggage to that one too, I guess.
Yeah, I think just arguing for a VP or director level will give the seniority, right?
Okay.
And having the CEO, giving a script to the CEO so that they give you sponsorship and introduce you in the right way will cement your position as a senior person on the team.
Great. And I know we've got some questions in, but I want to, kind of follow on this a little bit further
Sure.
in terms of best practices for the CEO to really, I talk about the difference between credibility and trust. You can borrow credibility, you got to earn trust, right? How does the CEO enable you to have the credibility to work in the chief of staff role? What can they do to make a difference?
So it's really this informal comms, before the hire, during the search, after the search. Um, Rightfully so, a lot of C-suite folks are going to be wary. Like, if you never had chief of staff, we're like, hey, what the heck is this? Like,
Right.
now I have to go through them to get to the CEO. This sucks, right? So, really selling the benefits. Like, we're going to save time and grow faster. We're going to save time, grow faster. We're going to save time and grow faster, right? Like hitting the drum multiple times over,
Okay.
formally and in an informal comms basis, very important. And then the chief of staff is saying, hey, how can I help you selfishly, CMO or CTO or COO? Like I have the ear of the CEO. I can bend the ear. I can help you frame a project or and ask for resources. I can help you, right? So that relationship, trust building exercise to get them help them get what they want to get.
Okay, so consistency, like CEO, they have a job on this. They've got to be talking about this over and over and over again. Chief of staff has to be looking for how they are helping other stakeholders in the CEO's orbit. What about those members of the staff that are concerned about the chief of staff being a gatekeeper? It's like, hey, all of a sudden I am losing my access to the CEO because I got to go through you.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe an effective framing is gateway instead of gatekeeper, right? It's
Okay.
gateway to
Yeah.
actually get your resources faster, the resources you want, and also to figure out what's priority, right? Implicitly, if you're coming with a request that's like low priority, then the chief of staff can redirect you and say, hey, this is actually what the CEO cares about and what you should care about, right? So that they can
Okay. Yep. Yep.
reframe their ask in the right way. So the chief staff's really teaching the rest of the org like what the CEO priorities are by implicitly accepting or declining requests, right? But just through that exercise, teaching how folks in the org can approach the CEO with an effective message, right? With something that's actually going to get them the things that they need.
Right. Well, and the context that you mentioned there sounds critical. Here's what the CEO's looking for right now. So not just cutting things off, but being able to provide additional information on what they're seeing, on what's going on, and that person ideally can make a more effective ask the next time. Uh,
you never know what the CEOs think about, right? You're just, well, even the CMO, right? You just know your CMO world, right?
Yeah.
But chief staff will have a full bird's eye view and know the framing, the social engineering, we might say, right? Which will get you an effective ask. And that benefits both. You know what's going to resonate with the CEO, what they care about right now, what's their pain point, what's on their mind.
Well, and I think so, like the social engineering piece, I think is a great term. Uh, how much do you think people are born with that versus learn it? Are these people who are just like innate, like, yeah, yeah, I can see you going into a chief of staff job because you're able to actually, move between these different groups versus someone who's really got to sit down and learn it. What's your opinion on born versus built on that?
I mean, it's great if you're born with it. You don't have to learn it. There's definitely people that are amazing. Which, by the way, in a remote setting or hybrid setting, like it pays off even more these
Right.
days, right? People
Yeah.
connect in a virtual way, and the chief of staff usually doesn't have direct reports in smaller organizations. So they really have to use soft power and social engineering to get things done. Um, Now, it definitely can be learned. You know, grew up in Palo Alto, went to Stanford, really believe in the plasticity of children's minds and adult learning, right? But it's not going to come natural, or it's not necessarily what
Right.
people want to do all the time. So that's a very important question to ask yourself, or even as I ask candidates for chiefs of staff. It's like, what's your experience in convincing someone of something that they don't want to do, or you maybe have
Right.
a hidden agenda. How do you deal with that?
Well, and the idea of understanding that this is an important part of your job is like, hey, how are you accessing that influence piece? Um,
That's right. That's right.
uh, what about KPIs for the office of the CEO? Like you said, hey, there's all sorts of things that we look at. How do we know if we're doing a good job? What are some of the ways that you look at whether or not an office of the CEO is doing a good job?
Yeah, so it's back to save time and grow faster as like the two kind of value pillars. On saving time, just like looking at the calendar, like how many low priority meetings are on there, how much white space is on this calendar. Are the meetings with the right seniority of people so that we're actually coming together with the right stakeholders. Um, you know, we also look at perhaps maybe decision making. So, like, we look at high stakes decisions. Are we able to make decisions more quickly in the office of the CEO? Can the CEO just read something and make a decision from option one, two, three, rather than having a meeting, right? So, decision making is another factor. And then on the grow faster part of the value pillar, it's looking at the customer touch point. So, how many CEO to CEO appointments have we set? How many deals have been originated through the CEO Midas touch? How many deals actually has the CEO come in and help close over the finish line for a really big multi-million-dollar strategic deal, right? They can sprinkle a little bit of, minus, fairy dust on top of that to
Right.
close out the deal. So looking at saving time and growing faster as the value pillars, and then associated KPIs with those.
Um, as we're looking at the job of the chief of staff, just looking at super high level now, thinking about in the last 10 years, and 10 years ago, chief of staff was not talked about very much at all. Maybe for folks who had prior military experience or things like that, you heard about it more often. What is the buzz around chief of staff now that you're seeing within the United States? And if there's anything that you're seeing internationally on chiefs of staff being more understood as a position as well.
Yeah, I would say maturity level of understanding in the US maybe, at a two out of, I would, say maybe five or something like that. Or we've like scratched the surface, but we're not like fully deployed. Obviously, it's much more, you know, talked about and understood maybe in like the tech world in the Bay Area, larger organizations. But there's a lot of value on the table to be, explored. Abroad, maybe level one in the UK and maybe a bit of Europe as well. Some of my clients are based there and thinking about how to deploy chief of staff. But similar, even in Germany, for example, they think it's like an HR position, right? And this goes back to like how the chief of staff is a terrible term. Um, and then, abroad, we actually had someone reach out to us who they were a African multinational conglomerate with ties to all the continent of Africa and the Middle East. And I think particularly family conglomerates and large complex organizations are looking to leadership solutions and organizational solutions like the Office of the CEO and the Chief of Staff. because they have this chairman or group CEO that's across multiple subsidiary CEOs,
Yeah.
very complex operation, and also geographically, right, as they do business in multiple countries and regions.
Yeah, I've seen exactly what you're talking about in terms of, oh, that's we have those, that's our VP of HR. And it's like, no, it's different. And so I think that there is a ton of education that's going on a consistent basis. But I think this goes back to your idea is like, hey, there's a ton of people doing the chief of staff job out there. They just don't have the title that's around it. All right,
Exactly.
so we're gonna end the recording in just a sec, but you've got the chief of staff playbook, or sorry, the office of the CEO playbook coming out. When's that coming out, and how can people check it out?
Yeah, we're gonna launch it sometime next week, probably Wednesday. You can find it through by connecting on my with me on LinkedIn, and also there'll be a link in my profile. We're doing a whole launch party. And the Office of the CEO playbook, really exciting. We talked to hundreds of offices of the CEO across the world, different types of organizations, folks at Apple, Snap, Instagram, Salesforce, et cetera, and really synthesize these best practices into this 60-page playbook. Our playbooks have been already read by 5,000 different professionals and leaders around the world already on the chief of staff. And so this was a natural extension from the chief of staff subject area to the office of the CEO.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Mackenzie. It's been awesome chatting, and we'll go to questions in just a second.
Thanks for having me.